The controller told us that these objects had been observed for over 2 weeks, coming down from over 80,000 feet, rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space.
Is there a correlation between any of the characteristics of these UAPs, UFOs?
What we tend to see are the smaller vehicles tend to be, think of a sports car. The large ones tend to be not always, but almost exclusively either triangular shape or boomerang shape.
Werewolves?
I see dead people walking around like regular people. They don't see each other. They only see what they want to see. They don't know they're dead.
The UFO, UAP community was fairly surprised. Shocked might be a better word.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
Biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human.
Do you think there is life on other planets?
Well, I'm not quite sure, but I suppose there would be.
I've seen a flying saucer.
You've seen one?
Yes, definitely. At Lane Cove.
When was this?
1953.
You don't think this is a figment of your imagination?
Several other people with me saw it.
I'm not wishing that all that stay with me.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
There is now a new UFO whistleblower with some major bombshell level statements.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This episode is brought to you by 8 amazing people: Eddie Tabb, Lisa Bowden, Taban Rice, Kelly Lewis, Mecca Mickey, Diane Boss, Jeanette Angel, and Dorothy Hawkins. And a special thank you to all of the subscribers on YouTube and the followers on Spotify. If you wish to support the podcast on YouTube, you can hit that join button below to become an Eyes to That Sky member. Or if you want to join our Patreon or provide other support, the links are below in the show description. But now, on with the show. Welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast, where we explore the unexplained and mysterious phenomena that have occurred throughout the state of Michigan and beyond.
From UFO sightings to ghostly encounters, we delve deep into the stories, the evidence, and the theories behind these strange events.
We are your hosts. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Wayne.
We are an educator duo that after an encounter with a triangular UFO in 2018 in Michigan, we decided to investigate UFOs and the paranormal. In this podcast, we will be speaking with eyewitnesses, experts, and researchers to uncover the truth about some of the most intriguing cases of paranormal activity in and around Michigan.
Our goal is not to convince anyone of the existence of these phenomena, but rather to provide a platform for discussion and exploration. So, buckle up and join us on this journey down the paranormal rabbit hole.
On an escalator.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. We are coming to you from Southeast Michigan within the shadow of the great Motor City Detroit, Michigan, and we are tucked away in our little humble abode. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. It is Friday, August 2nd, 2024. It's August already. I can't believe it.
No.
And since we've gone on vacation, the world seems to be going crazy at the speed of light. So it's going crazy is really, really good. I don't know, Michelle, what's your thoughts?
From the time that we were driving to the airport to head west, it seems like it's just been one thing after another.
I mean, we've got assassination attempts. We've got
the
Olympics.
Biden's letter.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, that was basically a coup. They basically told Biden he's done for, so his party is.
Well, what was it? They said that he had COVID. Come to find out, he had a stroke. I mean, it was like, okay, everything is just spiraling.
Yeah.
So, and then we come to the latest with the Olympics, and we're just not going there.
Yeah. It's
no.
Look, we can explain what's going on with the Olympics with just a very small phrase. It's the French.
I was going to say 2 words, shit show.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess a shit show would be a good word for it. But anyways, there's enough people talking about that garbage.
Absolutely. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's get into this a little bit. So on this episode, we have someone I am happy to call a friend and a kindred spirit. And we got him for about an hour tonight. And that's Michael Roser. And he is the host of the show, Dark Hour Paranormal. He's going to be joining us here in a moment to discuss the esoteric, paranormal, UFOs, cryptids, and all kinds of stuff. I'm sure we're going to cover about 1/100% of everything that we could talk about tonight.
I need a good paranormal story tonight. No pressure, Michael. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. So it's going to be a hell of a show. Again, as always, if you want to get in touch with the show, you want to email Michelle and I, you can email us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com.
Remember, if you're also looking at making a donation to the podcast, you can do so with PayPal, Super Chats, buy us a coffee, or join the Patreon. All of those links can be found below in the show description.
And you know, Michelle, one thing I forgot to mention in that little script of ours is that we do have an online store where people can buy like Michigan UFO t-shirts and all kinds of stuff.
We still have our shirts with driver.
Yeah, and hoodies. We got zip up hoodies, we got pullover hoodies, we got hoodies for this and hoodies for that. So make sure you guys
we came back from Pit Chat. So
yeah. So that's all good, and that link is down in the show description. And by the way,
we are 2 episodes away from our 100th episode of doing this show. We're having a get together at one of our favorite neighborhood establishments. Remember that new Boston Coney and Grill? That'll be on Saturday, August 17th. 2024, obviously, starting around 3 p.m. Eastern, going till 7 p.m., which is when they close. We're going to try to set up a small recording area, depends on their Wi-Fi, to record your encounters or stories for release on a later episode. But the main purpose is just to have some good food and have a small meet and greet.
Yep. And by the way, episode 100 is all set up. It is going to be Sunday, August 18th. So that's going to be the day after our get together. At 8 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be having Dennis Stone of America's Stonehenge returning to the show, along with Jared Murphy and the crew from Archeo X. And hopefully Michael, who's in the background there in the studio, in the green room, quote unquote, will be able to join us. We're going to be talking about the latest technologies for exploring ancient sites, the possibility of high tech in the ancient world, and a ton of other topics. So make sure you join us August 18th at 8 p.m. Eastern for our 100th episode. All right, everybody. Just real quick, I see y'all in chat. Just going to make this quick and fly through here. We got Diane Boss, obviously.
We have Janine. We have Janine Hollis. We've got Billy Bob.
And let's see, Diane Boss.
We have Guy Merritt with us tonight.
Hey, Guy.
We have Intergalactic Angler.
Yep, who's a little under the sauce right now. And there's other people watching not participating in chat, that's fine.
Not
So welcome.
yet.
And we are also streaming once again over on Instagram, giving this a shot. So let's see how this works out. All right, let's get into this. And I want to go ahead and bring on. So he's a podcaster. He's a ghost hunter. He's an esoteric explorer, investigator of all things paranormal, and the host of the Dark Hour Paranormal podcast or show or YouTube channel. So here he is. It's Michael Roser. What's up, buddy?
What's going on, Wayne and Michelle? Thank you very much for having me tonight. It's an honor.
Oh, man, no, the honor is all ours. We are super happy to be able to get you on and actually talk to you and get your thoughts on some things. And we're obviously going to have you back on. And you've got to come on for Dennis Stone.
I do plan on being there for that, my friend.
All right, perfect. So,
to say the least.
We need somebody to talk more about the esoteric during that show. That's going to be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's just dive right into this, man. Well, first of all, you and I got to meet up over last weekend, which was really cool. Myself and you and Jared Murphy and Tom Elmore all got together and we ran around Connecticut, and then we went up to New Hampshire and hit America's Stonehenge, which if we got time, I'll bring up some of those photos and things I wanted to talk to you about. But really want to find out whatever made you want to study the paranormal and start your journey to where you are now with like Dark Hour Paranormal.
Well, it's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Everybody
and I'll
has
be accepting $1 million at any point.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully we can all cross our fingers and toes, but as long as we can still walk and pick things up, I guess we're in good shape. To be honest with you, everybody has a very different story when it comes to their involvement, how they, sort of got into something like this. And yet there are parallels that we find, especially when it comes to the age, or at least a window in terms of age where people are exposed to this or start questioning. For myself, I've gone back and really thought about my experiences as a child. And oddly enough, I can kind of pinpoint one incident where I feel that I kind of opened up to the spiritual world. It was completely unintentional. And for me at that point, there was a trigger that allowed me to feel negativity, the way that I would describe walking into a site today that has some sort of negative influence. There's something very familiar about how it hits your chest, goes into your solar plexus, goes into your abdomen. There's an energy, a signature there that can be quantified to a certain degree with an anecdotal experience. And for me, I was about 4, maybe 5 years old at the most. And I remember laying in bed and there was a very soft lit lamp over to my right in the room. And for whatever reason, I couldn't sleep. So I got up out of bed and I walked down the hall. My father was laying in front of the television, watching some movie. So, I began to explain to him that, I can't sleep. Obviously, he sees I'm up. And as he goes to get up, I'm kind of watching the television, obviously distracted at the movement at the time. And I see a scene where a woman enters a room that's completely disheveled. I mean, maybe this is an industrial area. I'm really not sure, but there was a lot of clutter everywhere. And then immediately the camera pans in to a severed head laying on the floor. Now, for me at 4 or 5 years old, this was my 4 or 5 years old. This was my introduction to what other aspects of the world had to offer in terms of experience and what people might do to each other. And it just jarred me very heavily to the point where I can still remember the feeling I had seeing that scene. And for some people, you say this is sort of a trauma-based event. There's a shock involved. Yeah, I'm sure all of that was true. But what it did was really open my solar plexus up, these front chakras in terms of interpretation of that energy going forward. So for me, going back, even though this seems like a very mundane sort of experience, that is where I believe my sensitivity became acknowledged within myself, I would say. And from that point on, I had different experiences growing up. I would see things outside my window that didn't make sense to be there. Certainly nothing familiar in terms of a wild animal. I mean, my floor was 2 stories above the ground. So to see something that resembled a bear but didn't really resemble a bear looking into my window didn't make sense. But as a child, I didn't have the analytical construct to really put that together. So, it was more of an emotional reaction. Now, fast forward to when I was about 12 years old, I met an individual in my 6th grade class. For whatever reason, I was very drawn to people, probably from the empathic point, that didn't necessarily have a lot of friends. They weren't on the in crew and so forth. But, I found a lot of value within these outsiders, if you will. And so I befriended this guy, and I understood that he was into magic. And for me, this was an introduction. I had a very peripheral understanding of what that was. I was, very interested in, unsolved mysteries at the time, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious Universe. I mean, there were very limited outlets to find some of this information, but I was trying to get into all of that just out of, curiosity. And I remember going to the library, and he opened a book. It was a very old book. I have no idea what it was. And he flipped to this one page, and there was an embroidering of some sort, or this engraving in old style. I can't remember that slate carving, what it's called.
Sure.
But it was an image of a skeleton laying on a coffin in a very desolate land. And I thought to myself, wow, this is interesting. And he looks at me point blank. He says, I can take you there. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I can physically take you to where that is. Well, I didn't necessarily want to go on any adventures in that sense that day, but I did kind of put it in the back of my mind and thought, well, this is curious. He's claiming to be able to bring me to a place that seems non-tangible. So I went to visit him at his house at some point, and I went up to his room, and I saw this burn mark in the floor that almost went all the way through the first floor. I said, what happened there? He goes, well, I was doing some incantations and working on a spell, and things didn't go as planned, and I almost burned the house down. I said, huh. That's curious. Again, not taking the seriousness or the gravity of the situation based on my experiences. I didn't have the context. So I didn't mention any of this to my folks at all. And, we were friends for that period of time, about 6-7 months. And I remember my mother came home from a reading one night, and she said, the clairvoyant had mentioned that there's an evil around your family. And for some reason, I already knew what she was talking about. Now, I was raised as Christian, and of course, a lot of this ideology was imbued in the thinking that not only my parents embodied, but was passed on to me in terms of interpretations of the world and so forth. So I immediately went into fear. And, my mother was obviously in the same place giving me this warning. Nobody really knew what this meant, but I had more of a handle on it. So I sought to divorce myself from that individual, seek the help of the church, and I did talk to a priest, and he ended up sending me blessed objects and so forth, which made me feel a little bit better. But there was still something that I couldn't put my finger on that didn't seem right, where I didn't feel protected. I didn't feel that there was even a threat, to be honest with you, but that was in my deepest thoughts. So I ended up going through that. Eventually we amicably parted, this guy and I. But I never really told him the reason for it. But again, it was fear-based. I know that now.
Mm-hmm.
I was allowed my very first reading when I was 13. And this was an exception to the rule. As we all know, you don't read for somebody under 18 because they become very impressionable and can take what you're saying word for word, not understanding that if you follow on this path, this is an opportunity that may come to you. If you diverge, this may not be an opportunity. So that divergence from linearity in terms of a reading, younger kids don't necessarily have that cognition. But for whatever reason, I was allowed to do this. And the reader told me a bunch of very general things in terms of what I thought I already knew about myself, my past, where my soul might have been. I've always felt like a very old soul, didn't feel like I belonged here. A lot of people can, identify with that. And that sort of spurred me into an interest in this world of esoterics in general. But what she left me with, which would change the course of my life in terms of what I would do at the end of the reading, was saying that I was a natural healer. And I very point blankly asked her, well, what does that mean? She says, you have the natural ability that if you chose to focus on it, you could be a healer. You could work with hands-on healing. You could work in energy. You could go into the medical field. You could do something physical, but you have the opportunity within your own design, your energetic makeup, that you could do this very fluidly. So she introduced me to somebody that she knew, and he took me under his wing at the age of 14. And I started doing free energy healing. We called it hands-on healing. We didn't have a modality name for it that people, kind of look towards today, like Reiki, which is good because you understand a structure when you mention a modality like that. But that's what sort of propelled me into the clairvoyance and just really opened my doors from that point on.
Very cool. So, Friends with Monsters says, "Hi, Michael."
Hey, what's up, Friends with Monsters? Good to see you, bro.
And
There's a lot of
Diane-
names I recognize in there. I just want to say hello to everybody, even though I can't name you all.
Yeah, then the Diane says, "Michael always has great stories to tell."
Now, Diane, you've been around once or twice, haven't you?
So, do you think that first experience when you were like 4 or 5 years old, that because you were so young and I want to say like unjaded, unprogrammed by the world, do you think that introduction through that process started this whole thing? And do you think that if kids experience something like that at a young age, even today, that could be a way for them to expand those chakras, that energy, and getting a different understanding of the world around them?
So, to put it simply, yes, but I also don't think that is the way that things should happen, because it is trauma based. And maybe I just got out a little unscathed, whereas somebody
Okay.
else carries that in a very traumatic way for the rest of their life. Anything trauma based will knock you out of your paradigm, out of your energetic comfort. And, when we talk about black projects, Wayne, we see a lot of that implemented going from MK Ultra all the way up to where we are today through Montauk and everything. A lot of this was used even in cults. There's a process, and I actually have literature as to how cults break you down
Yep.
and then
Mhm.
reprogram you. But again, this isn't the most constructive way to do it. Anything with force is going to yield a certain result, and it may be a desired result, but it's going to be fallible in the very end of the day. You do
Right.
something through love, you educate through that way, you give experience through that way, it becomes a permanent part of your foundation, and you're not tempted to dip into the fear or the mysterious, what's the word I'm looking for? The mystery of that which is unknown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, since you brought up Montauk, and you're over there on the East Coast with a lot of history over there, a lot of energy flowing around over there. And before we jump into a little bit about America's Stonehenge, because I know you've got some experiences there, can you talk a little bit about that, the history of Montauk and what's going on with that? I always thought that was very interesting, and since you've directly like investigated that area and everything, correct?
Oh, yes.
All right, so I'm interested in hearing straight from the horse's mouth what you think is going on over there.
Well, it starts with the land itself. When we look back to Pangea and we see the formation of how that continent was, we realize that what we know as Long Island was actually a part of Egypt. It was the same landmass. And that may be good in terms of a topographical sense to look at and analyze, and we will get some understanding from that. But to go further, the culture of what Egypt was actually traveled over to Montauk and to the Native Americans that were there. In fact, the name Pharaoh as a surname only shows up as two families, and they were both within the tri-state area. Going back to what Egypt represented, within their fascination with Mars. And that's something that kind of blows me away, because this is present in every culture that we've documented in our history. They all had a reverence for Mars. I mean, you would think, a closer celestial body like the moon, maybe they would go for that. And yes, they had reverence for it, but something about Mars was always intricately and deeply seated within these particular cultures.
Mhm.
Obviously, Egypt, no different. Now, when the colonists came to Long Island many years ago and they met with the Native Americans, they noticed that there were pyramids built all around the place. And some of these were very large, 20 plus feet, and others were just breaking 10 to 15 to 18 feet. And so they asked him, you said, well, how did you build all these pyramids? And the Native Americans said, well, we didn't build the small ones. We did the bigger ones. And that took a long time, but we didn't build the small ones. They said, well, where did the small ones come from? And they said, well, those were built from the people that come from Mars, and we don't like them because they take our women and children. And of course, the colonists were sitting there scratching their head. Well, what do you mean?
What are you talking about? Right.
Exactly. I mean, this is completely foreign to that particular civilization at the time. And obviously there are reasons for that going into the Cathols and Freeze and the other secret society, the Thule Society, all these different societies that had secrets and so forth. Anyway, so within these conversations, they understood that the Native Americans had contact with people that were from Mars. And who could say if they were from this timeline, this line of era, or if they came from somewhere else? We really don't know. But this was the purported story. And within that, they had certain names that were pseudonyms or parallels within the etymology of the words that went back to Mars. I mean, Cairo itself means Mars. So there's a lot of connection with Montauk, Egypt, and Mars, which becomes more significant when you get into the Montauk Project and what they allegedly did there in terms of that particular travel, going to Mars, going into the vaults of history that are underground there somewhere, finding certain artifacts to the point where they could actually bring things back with them. Obviously, quantifying to a certain degree what these cultures in past ages were doing there. So we have a lot of this knowledge. But going back to Montauk, the land itself was a very sacred place for not only the Algonquin, but a handful of sister tribes that were in that area, all rooting back to the Algonquin. And, you look at the Bridgewater Triangle up here in Massachusetts, there's the same connection. The Hockomock Swamp was revered as very sacred. And, once it was adulterated with war and strife and murder, well, we now have this whole phenomenon as we know today as the Bridgewater Triangle. So why did people pick Montauk to be the place to conduct this project? Well, it's very simple. They were doing this at Brookhaven National Labs in the early 60s. And when they figured out the frequency patterns that would enable mind control on a massive scale, they brought it to Congress. And they said, hey, look what we can do. We can weaponize this. And Congress said, yeah, and you could probably use it against us. Let's take your funding out. That's it. You guys are done. So right. The Air Force got wind of this with the scientists that mostly came over from Project Paperclip, all the Nazi Germans and so forth, von Braun, Wilhelm Reich. I mean, all these different individuals were working for the United States at that time and were very good at what they did. Went to the Air Force. Air Force said, okay, we can move this out to the abandoned base at the eastern tip of Long Island, known as Camp Hero. And that's where they nestled in. Now, the funding for this project came from privatized areas. There's also the story of the train wreck that happened out in Europe at some point where thousands and thousands and millions of dollars of gold went missing. And apparently this was used to fund some of the Montauk Project at a later point in time.
Interesting.
But, oh yeah, I mean, there's a whole depth in terms of that story and where that funding comes from. And it's all connected to different family names. So the three key whistleblowers, you look at Preston Nichols, Al Balick, and Duncan Cameron. The surname Cameron goes all the way back hundreds of years. And within that line, there are anomalies to such a degree that you can't count. And maybe because of that, we could say that there was some sort of magic or understanding in terms of esoteric principles that was passed down within those active with the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and so forth. They were involved in all this. Parsons is another name. And we know Jack Parsons. Obviously, he was born in Worcester. JPL. That's right. And, he was in these secret societies as well. And when he got to the 13th level, he just disappeared, which is supposed to be what it is. Or you fake your death. And there's a lot of discrepancy on how he actually died. Nobody ever saw his body, including his spouse. So going back again, it's hard to just stay focused on this because it's such a vast subject that covers so much that, I mean, we couldn't sit here and talk about this for long enough. Trying to take out key points for you.
Right.
They began this project largely as a piggyback to MK Ultra, and they went into the psychic activity. They did the LSD rooms. I mean, we have proof. We have pieces of wallpaper that came from the LSD house that has since been raised. There are no reasons that these type of psychedelic patterns should be found on a military base unless they're doing some type of work like this, even though they deny it to the T. It was of the same era. It happened in the same time. We know that Timothy Leary had actually visited that site. We know that Aleister Crowley was back there in the 30s and the 40s. So there are a lot of prominent names associated with Montauk, and I suspect, again, it goes back to the magical and sacred properties of the land itself, which eventually enabled them, with ley lines and all, to execute some of the more fantastic allegations that we find within that project.
Now, I thought the project had something to do with some type of a creature, some type of a cryptid.
So that one that you're referencing, his name was Junior, affectionately known. And he didn't come until the very end of the topical Montauk project that you and I know much about. And it was a subversion. It was a sabotaging of the project, apparently headed by 4 people, including the 3 whistleblowers I've mentioned. Duncan Cameron was to sit in that psychic chair and given a key phrase, which was "the time is now," given the title of my latest documentary. He was to release from his subconscious the most ugly, dark, and negative entity that he could possibly come up with. And the idea was to manifest this underground and have the whole thing just wreak havoc. Well, unfortunately, it manifested above ground and still wreaked havoc, smashing buildings, swatting people out of the way, knocking down trees, whole structures on the base were being crushed by this 12, 15 foot, shadow thing that looked like a Bigfoot. There are actually pictures that had been taken during the time it was still walking around on the base.
Well, then
from publicists.
Well, and that goes then to Friends with Monsters comment here. It says massive Bigfoot creature seen in photos from Camp Hero.
That's Junior.
Yeah.
And he's still there. He pops in every once in a while. You'll catch him on camera. You'll feel him. You'll see him in a photo. Sometimes I've been told he's in motion. I've never actually seen him in motion. I've seen him standing still, almost like a silhouette against a wall. And he's trapped in some sort of dimensional frequency that I don't think there's many who can help that one return to where it came from, because it was a product of Duncan Cameron's psyche. And I suspected that once Duncan left this earthly plane, perhaps that facet of him would go with, but it didn't seem to do that. It seems to be fixed on Montauk, which really goes into the whole idea that the energy that locks into Montauk, I mean, you're there. That's it. Once you're there, and you will always be there. There's some signature within your energy will always be a part of Montauk.
Yeah, and I'm sure he was really cranking out the negative energy there to create this creature, this thing.
I would imagine.
So, yeah. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about this latest documentary you did?
So I had the privilege of sitting down with quite a few survivors of the Montauk Project and, really kind of going into detail. Myself, I am connected to the Montauk Project. No, I was not there in this physical body, but the story of how I'm connected, let's just say for the moment that those who ran the project are in my soul family. And unfortunately, as much as I wanted to divorce myself from this, it kept finding me. And I eventually had to answer that call to understand why I was part of this. Because believe me, as sensational as this sounds and as cool as Stranger Things is, you really don't want to have a connection with this. It was a really bad thing that happened not only on a physical level, but on multi-levels within the ethers. And we're still trying to fix that today. One of the reasons I'm here in the form that I am is because that's part of my responsibility. Another conversation altogether, but that's
right.
Another part of my connection to the project.
Okay.
Sorry, what was your question?
Well, just wondering about this, The Time Is Now documentary.
Oh, the documentary. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to that, I got in touch with James Rink, who is a good friend of mine, Alondra Markman, the same way. John D'Souza made an appearance in this documentary, with his background with the FBI. He had actually heard of the project before anybody was really talking about it publicly. This is back in the 70s when the residents of Montauk knew something was happening. But outside of that, nobody had any idea. Nothing was really verified. But he had told me, even you can see, some of his testimony in the documentary, that, 100% they knew that they had some sort of Hadron Collider down there. And Peter Moon, with his Pyramids of Montauk book, had verified that they were messing around with an early stage Hadron Collider. And this was proposed in terms of the energy it would take to, power some of the devices, go into time travel, do a lot of other things experimentally and empirically, again, that would need thousands upon thousands of volts to execute and then maintain that. And of course, the lighting company, Long Island Lighting, was intricately hooked up to that camp, and they still, even what they were using out of that was not even close to what they needed to run a project this way. So within the documentary, you're going to find these testimonies from these people, and I'm going to tell you that there are some who are younger than me. I mean, we're talking maybe 20 years younger than me. And somebody might say, as I did, well, how were you a part of the Montauk Project when it, collapsed in 1983? You weren't born to the 1990s. And the answer that I've come up with, and this is outside of some of their explanations, is that there was a sister leg to this project that did go through the 90s. And there were people who were still being abducted and used or utilized in the same way that they were originally doing, but everything was refined. So I don't know if they had lost some information on the original project, wherein they were sending these kids in the second project back to observe some of the processes that happened in the original project, and then have them come back and then, sort of iterate what they had gone through, what they had seen, whatever that mission was that they were to recover, see, observe, whatever. But I find a lot of that in the younger individuals who still claim to go through the conditioning. And their stories are parallel with others that I've come against. And some of these are not publicized, and yet there are connections. To me, inherently, there's something there. When you find connections in people who are not inherently connected, there's something intellectual to look at and a deduction to be made. So as far as I know, even today, there is some activity going down in the underground in Montauk. I believe that if anything, it's more archival. They've definitely moved this closer to New Jersey, going down the eastern seaboard, going out to Colorado. There are tunnels and systems that connect a lot of these different bases, the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, together. And they were already shipping people back and forth from Montauk to New York, back to Brookhaven National Labs through these underground tunnels when the project was active. So there's a whole underground world that goes into this that we're trying to reveal. And one of the things that I set out to do with this documentary specifically was to prove that, yes, there is an underground. Now, we saw the Dark Files do this a little bit. Montauk Chronicles touched on it a bit. But going into these different areas and seeing for yourself that there are entrances, and then people saying, that's where I was taken, right there, down that hole, down that hatch, and here's what it looked like. We do GPR, we do LiDAR scanning, we can find some of these structures that are deep underground. Now, we might say, well, these are military World War II bunkers. Yeah, some of them are on the bluff side. But the significance here is that not only are we seeing these bunkers fall out of the bluff at this point, the military is still telling us that there's nothing underground. And you look at the blueprints, there are no underground structures. And yet you go there and you can see where it leads to. Maybe it's Utilidor. Maybe there's sewers. I mean, these are structures that are underground that the government will not acknowledge. And I'll leave you with this on this comment. If you talk to them and you say, okay, this is a state park now, it's been this way since I think 2002. I'm going to walk around. They say, great, everything on the surface is legal and public. As soon as you put a finger half-inch into the ground, you're on government property. You cannot dig there. You cannot explore underground. That is classified. Why? It's a public park. Not to mention that there are live unexploded munitions still in the park, so you can't go off trail. It's a public park. There's so many anomalous things going on with Camp Hero, and I'm just touching upon some of the more topical ones.
Yeah, well, Friends with Monsters says right here, Michelle, you want to take that?
He said that I had a dream about being at Montauk, seeing a UFO and feeling negative energy like he couldn't move.
We get a lot of we get a lot of the remembrances through dream, and a lot of times these dreams build upon themselves. So somebody has a certain action happen in a dream, and then they redream that same action, but then it continues on, and then it starts to build as they go on. Next thing you know, they're having what feels like a year or 2 years of an experience in a dream, but it's just repetitious in a sense. Those are the things that I start looking at in terms of those consistencies, those patterns, because whatever they were doing to erase the minds of those involved, it wasn't a permanent thing, even though they probably thought it was. It wasn't. because people started remembering these things, and it'll come up in your everyday. You could be sitting around looking at something, and all of a sudden you're triggered, and boom, immediately you're right back to that space, and you have no idea why. But it's to show you that there is a connection, or there's something for you to explore there. So Friends with Monsters, I would meditate on this one a little bit. I would try to go into it and feel as much as you can in that remembrance, even within the dream, to sort of trigger and pull something else out, because it's so deep rooted, so deep seated, that many of us who have a connection to this may never realize it for their entire lives.
Yeah. You know, that sounds like a theory. What you just mentioned, I've got this theory that I've been kicking around, because Michelle and I, we got into this because of a huge black triangle we saw here in just in northeastern Michigan, just northeast of Detroit here in southeastern Michigan. And, you know, it was 2:30 in the morning, but there were other vehicles and stuff, and no one else seemed to be reacting to it, which I've been thinking about this a lot. And I was talking to another person that in 1994 saw basically like the same kind of thing, had the same kind of experience that we did here in Michigan, quite far north of us, but still same interesting kind of experience. He was not abducted or anything, neither were we, but he had coworkers
that you know of
being, yeah, right. Well, here's my thought. My thought process is, I'm thinking that what Michelle and I saw when we were, put it this way, I'm trying to put it because it's a time thing. It's like people talk about that they've seen UFOs, and they could be standing right next to somebody and going, do you guys see that? And they're like, no. Maybe and this is what I'm thinking. We saw that thing on a different night, but when we got to that point again in the road, the memory then was freed up, and it looked like and dealing with like it was happening live, but it wasn't for us. It happened. It had already happened like in the past. So nobody's going to see and react to what we're reacting to because it happened in the past. Right. So I'm wondering if when you hear these kind of stories, maybe it's trauma based. I don't know. I heard a voice in my head that said, "Get away, you don't belong here, get away," and felt immense terror, like something that was not normal, like a created terror in my head and throughout my whole body that was like, get the hell out of here, and here's some fear to go along with it. And I've never felt or experienced a fear like that before. And so as I thought about it, I was like, okay, maybe we don't have a lot of people in that area that are seeing it, because we had seen it before. And
it's certainly, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, and whatever it is, something then, whether the block is removed or there's something that triggers, you're right at the right exact spot at a later time, boom, now you're reliving it in real time. So that's my thought.
I mean, I think it's a very valid thought, and something to be explored or expounded upon a little further within recountants of these experiences. Certainly, I don't think that we experience time as a linear event, even though the mind seems to compartmentalize it in that respect. It does its best to do this, and I think it's to keep a coherence, some sort of organization that is familiar to the mind, because as we know, the mind doesn't like to stray outside of what it's comfortable with, and yet we push ourselves to do this occasionally, and this is how we grow. The fact that you have instances where maybe two people are standing side by side, one is witnessing what we'd consider to be a UFO, the other one's looking at the night sky saying, I don't see anything, and yet they're literally physically standing next to each other. There may be a couple explanations for this, but right now it all sits in the world of conjecture. I've heard people propose that through frequency, and a lot of this goes back to the physics of vibration and so forth, they're able to target or sort of eggshell one person into a electromagnetic field of some sort, something where they're isolating that person from their environment, although they're still existing within that environment and experiencing whatever's within that bubble outside of, what people outside of them are experiencing. It's something completely different. And again, if I had $1 for every one of these experiences that have been mentioned or covered in one way or shape or form, I'd be a very rich man, because they're that prevalent. And, we have, again, just the best of our intellectual explanation to go on with it. Certainly talking about what you're mentioning, I believe in bleed-throughs of timelines. I mean, I don't necessarily believe the majority of the Mandela effect, but I think in some senses there is something there. And yes, we do, from my understanding, jump from timeline to timeline as we create this going forward, because every choice, every breath that you take, every step you make determines something different in terms of an outcome if you did something differently. You could rack your head with this sort of thing. It's fun to think about, but you drive yourself crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very possible what you were seeing was an indicative memory that came back through a trigger, and now you're witnessing something else that others around you aren't, because you are part of or energetically connected to that one way, shape, or form. But in my opinion, when it comes to the TR3B, the triangular shaped craft, or we look at the Bob Lazar sports model, the cube, some of these very familiar, this Tic Tac, you name it. I understand that about 85 to 90% of what we see in our skies that are unidentified are ours. And they're back engineered crafts that we have undertaken a certain effort with, going into Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works. These are the companies that have that reconnaissance stuff. It's not the governments. They don't know anything about this to an extent, but really not much. It's these privatized organizations that have every right to have that material and not tell you or I a goddamn thing, including the government. Right. They're not under any legal obligation to tell them anything. So the other 10%, 15, 10%, whatever it is is definitely something that we can't identify. And we've seen, figures in these crafts that look like what we describe alien grays to be, reptilians, insectoid beings, you name it. There's something else going on with these. And yes, we had to get that technology from somewhere prior to us being able to apply it. Now, a lot of these black projects go back into that technology, and you can see how they applied that going forward. In fact, when you look at the chair from Montauk, we didn't create that specifically. It was given to us by the Palladians or the Syrians, one of the two. I think it was the Palladians. Could be wrong on that. Regardless, that was an introduction. Then we take it apart, seeing how it works, and they explain it to us. Next thing you know, we can apply to something else. Take Einstein's unified field theory, for example. One of the biggest problems they had in understanding what this meant for the bigger scope of things was how to apply it in an immediate sense. And yeah, they've done that in many ways, going forward since the 30s and the 40s. But nonetheless, we find that same pattern when trying to describe some of this phenomenon, even when it sits in the world of esoterica.
Now, if people want to see your documentaries, are they all up on your YouTube?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so that would be, just so everybody knows, if you want to go to his YouTube channel and check it out, it's just the @ symbol at Dark Paranormal or Dark Hour Paranormal, and you type that into the YouTube, and it will take you right to his website or his YouTube channel. So yeah, so awesome. All right, you have a lot of experience at America's Stonehenge, correct?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Tell us a little something that you dealt with at America's Stonehenge.
There were quite a few things that I could go into. I'll pick a couple prominent things that stick in my mind here. I went up with Jared Murphy 4 years ago, maybe now, I think.
Yeah, he said that when you guys went up there, that was the first time you guys met.
It was. And, at the point, I don't think we did any lectures that run through. I think we just filmed for the documentary. But, we've given lectures and walkthroughs and so forth, educating people about the site since then. But that first foray, I was very fascinated. Dennis walked us around, allowed me to chew his ear off and ask any question I could figure. And this is before I could sit him down to interview. And, I had some knowledge of the site prior to. I'd done quite a bit of research, but I found a lot in terms of the ghost hunting stuff. I think David Schrader had been there at one point, and there were a couple other, prominent figures in that world that had visited and, televised this. And I wasn't really buying everything that was being put out there in terms of those analytics. And I wanted to walk in there with kind of as a clean slate, right? So no expectations whatsoever. So a lot of the history itself really hit me first. And I was very intrigued by that. So if you go to America's Stonehenge, you're going to find these different outcroppings, these little buildings that you can go into. I mean, they're small, in many cases, but there's certainly a great structure, that's being excavated there. And there's one area called the Oracle Chamber, which, if again you visit, you will find just above it is a tabernacle of sort. And a lot of people believe that they were sacrificing children and so forth. There's a reason for that, given the history of Stonehenge in terms of the religions that may have passed through there and what they believed in. It's a possibility. Nothing's been founded yet. Okay. And I didn't find that there was any activity with the tabernacle itself. However, as soon as I tried to walk into the Oracle Chamber, the very first time I was filming, I walked in with the camera, and immediately I took maybe 3 feet in, and I immediately was surrounded by the darkness. It was enveloping, and it just kind of clung to me like a wet sheet. And at the same time that I'm perceiving this, I get this really heavy feeling, and I can see in my mind's eye that there's this figure standing there about 7 or 8 feet tall. And I'm like, oh, no. Okay, never mind. I come back out. I'm going to reassess this because I've had my own, negative experiences with entities, and I did not want to step into something that I wasn't ready to deal with once again. And I kind of left it for what it was, vowing that I would go back in there probably with Dennis the next day and just kind of feel that out. Jesus Christ, hold on a second, buddy.
No problem.
So I did go back in with him the next day. I didn't feel the same energy, but I did notice that it was still there on the property. So we filmed, I think, over the course of maybe 3-4 days. And I think it was the third day, my kids came up with me. My daughter was, 6, 7 at the time, something like that, younger girl, and, we're exploring around, and we get to the entrance of the Oracle Chamber. And I said to her, here, come here for a second. I want you to stand in the front of this and tell me if, what you think. I didn't say anything in terms of what I was looking for. So she walks in front of it and she looks in, she goes, ooh, what's in there? I said, I don't know. What do you think? She goes, I don't know. I feel something big in there. I don't like it. I said, okay. And I didn't press her any further because, at that point I had gotten, what I was looking for. And obviously I wasn't going to put her in any sort of predicament, obviously.
Right.
What I came to understand later is that this is a watcher spirit. And this differs from any of the other hauntings that you might find or presences in certain sites, because they're there for a very specific reason, to protect the site. Nobody really knows why. We can assume or guess or, make some sort of, thought behind it, but they generally don't have to do with the actual site itself. They are called in independently to whatever energy or whatever history is there to watch over that site. And I've come against another one in Douglas, Massachusetts, which at first we battled out. I didn't win. And then I had to go back years later, and through certain process, I became an ally with that. And that's how I understood the dynamic of what a watcher spirit was. But there's a huge watcher spirit over at America Stonehenge, and it guards that place with impunity.
Wow. Well, since we're on this topic, I want to go ahead and show quickly some of the pictures that I took. And I'm going to tell you, when I got there, I felt like I was about 12 years old.
Yeah, dude. Yep.
Once I walked out of the gift shop and stuff there, and I walked out onto that back area, dude, I was running. I mean, Jared and Tom were behind me, and I'm just like looking at everything. So I want to share a few pictures with everybody. I'm going to click through them pretty fast. Obviously, this stone here, I believe, is the one that's denoting the North Star. And there's multiple stones like this all around the place. But this is something I wanted to show you because this was something you and Jared found on that first visit 4 years ago with him.
Yeah.
And I looked up that symbol.
Yeah.
It's Phoenician.
It is. So
if I understand it correctly, it means ox.
I didn't get that far. I found it in the alphabet, the Phoenician alphabet. I appreciate that you did a little more research on that because it's something I keep meaning to revisit. This is a very personal discovery for me. It was my first archaeological discovery that I've ever, been able to be a part of. And I remember we were just kind of walking around the area, surveying, some of the more serpentine walls and going into the details about that. And this caught my eye sitting down, about halfway into the wall. And I said, what the hell is that? So I walk over to it independently. And I kneeled down to it, and I'm thinking, is this a quartz run? No, wait a minute. The diameter of these markings is even. It's consistent throughout, and it looks like a triangle. But then I started noticing like the sideways looking A, which has no relation to the English alphabet. It's just what my mind thought of, pareidolia in a sense, right? That's where I went. But when I brought Dennis over to look at it, he said, holy shit, I've never seen this before. His family has owned this for decades. And they have gone through this site. I mean, Dennis is an open encyclopedia when it comes to America's Stonehenge. The guy will tell you every little thing down to the blade of grass you're standing on. And yet he had not seen this or anyone before him. So I was absolutely elated. We were, I mean, if you see the documentary on the America's Stonehenge, I do capture that moment when I find this thing. And, obviously there was subsequent research that went into this to sort of verify that this was more of an artifact rather than something anomalous within the geology itself. So that was a lot of fun for me. And it just continued my interest in that site, knowing that there are so many secrets that even though many have traversed this area, have not come across.
Yeah. And, it's pretty apparent that the people from Africa, the southern Spain, Portugal region, the Mediterranean Sea, they were crossing the Atlantic. They knew where to go. They knew where the quote unquote new world was. I mean, the evidence is just becoming more and more overwhelming that there was transatlantic travel and maybe even trade. So I don't know what the holdback is on accepting some of this stuff and changing our understanding of history. But, history, what do they say? History moves with the death of one historian at a time, so, but, I'm going to flip through some of these. So there's just a shot off the top of the hill. And by the way, this is all very, very thin topsoil. For those of you that want to know a little bit more about this, the bedrock is almost maybe an inch or two at the most directly beneath all this. This is all new growth. All of this area used to be just barren. They used to burn it. So now this was something I found, and I don't know, Michael, maybe you know a little bit about this. This was over by that stone. You can see somebody's feet. That's Jared, because he always wears sandals. But if you look at these, I found, because I was walking around with my head down most of the time and picking up stuff and looking at rocks and everything. This is almost like a straight saw cut. Yeah. And I found quite a few of these, like up there. You can see there, it looks like there's a circular cut that might be here, and it continues on.
I think these were all inlays. I think something was on top of these that fit perfectly in there.
Or maybe they were actually using it as a quarry. I don't know. But yeah, these could have been like some type of a locking system. But I found a few of these. Let's see. And this one I found real interesting. This is a cut, and where the rock had broke and then somehow moved away, but somebody probably moved it. But this is a cut that goes all the way through. It just
certainly
really
seems that way.
Yeah, very strange stuff. There's your winter solstice marker, I believe. Some witch stuff going on.
Oh yeah, all the time. We were up there during Beltane when we were filming that first documentary. Yeah. Saturday night. Yeah, I remember that.
There's different groups that go in there and do things. There's the stone once again. Okay. There's one thing I thought, okay, here's this thing.
There's the tabernacle.
Now this recently, and I didn't know this, and when Dennis was on our show last year, he didn't talk about this, but somebody got into Stonehenge with a chainsaw and actually knocked this thing down and cut holes.
They defaced it. They attempted to, put a whole new face on this. very quickly, somebody just mentioned in the chat, Scott Walters talking about the Phoenicians. Yes, he did a whole show on America's Stonehenge, and it's actually really enlightening. I mean, talking about the Phoenicians, looking at that coin, they had the Americas before they were Americas already on the coin, which indicated that they had traveled extensively across, from that point all the way over to the Americas,
right?
And more than likely all the way to the West Coast here in North America. But yeah, that particular piece, I think this guy was motivated by some sort of ideology, some sort of fanatic with that. It's a sort of a one-off. We don't really generally have too much issue up there with people trespassing and coming in. But yeah, that was a doozy. And the worst part about this too, in terms of what he was trying to do, I'm half certain, and I'll say it that way, that tabernacle was probably used for lye and making, different soaps and so forth. The way that it's carved, the depth of the carving, how there are drains on either side, it doesn't look like something that would be used for human bodily fluids in any way, shape, or form. It looks like something that was used to create lye and soap. So if that's the case, this guy is over there with a chainsaw thinking it's some sort of evil object, trying to, what was he doing? Putting a cross into it or something stupid. You're not doing anything good for anybody by doing that,
Right.
You're not making a point. You're not making a statement. There's not going to be anybody standing behind you going, "Hey, I'm glad you did that." No, you didn't do anything. So,
yep. And by the way, this here is a fault line, just so people know. You can see how it was different than the one that looked like a cut, like somebody had cut through it. Because this is jagged. It's straight, but it's kind of jagged and things like that. Just some other areas there. The blocks are amazing, absolutely amazing. This one had fallen. This was the top to this area, and it looked like it had fallen. They just left it in situ there. There's one thing that I found real interesting. So where is the picture? I think it's the serpent head. And I asked Dennis, how big? Oh, and there are these little windows.
Yes.
In the wall, which was weird because they were covered by a flat piece. You just grab the stone and move it over, and there's a window for whatever reason. Like, very bizarre stuff. Was that it? Yeah. So there's the head of the snake, right? And this is a 2000, according to Dennis, they GPS'd it. They walked around. It's a circular serpent, and this is the head of the snake here. Looks like it's biting part of its tail, and then this is like the tip of the tail coming off here, and they measured it via GPS, and it was 2,550 feet around, which is very interesting because that would be 1/10 of the amount of time that it takes for the precession of the equinox to happen.
That's a good correlation there. I like that.
Yeah. So it's 25,500 years or so on the precession of the equinox. And this looks like a 1/10 model representation of that. There's another one of those windows. Really bizarre. There's the snake head yet again. And it looks like it's biting its tail and things. So, yeah. Yep. Yep.
Very quickly, I don't mean to diverge, but I do remember seeing a question from, I think it was Nain Rouge, about Montauk and exploration. She had asked, or they had asked, I don't know who you are, whether or not you should have radiation equipment going into Montauk. My advice is yes, because there are parts of the base that are radioactive, and we've actually proven that. We walk in with the equipment to detect radiation. We each have a canister on us at all times when we're in the base. We've never really come up against levels that we had to be concerned about, but we have gotten ticks that did indicate that there were light levels of radiation. And Brian Minnick actually has a great story about a particular stone that he and his friends would always get sick around when they were younger. And, you have to keep in mind, growing up in Montauk, that place was, Camp Hero, by and large, in that whole area, people would just go and, camp, or they'd have, cookouts and stuff. And they'd say, "Oh, kids, go play in the woods." And the kids would run off into the base. And there was, again, this very large stone that I've actually visited. And he came to find out at one point that it was radioactive. And this is probably one of the reasons that they were feeling so ill after playing around it as kids. So I just wanted to address that.
Yeah.
I saw your question earlier.
Yep. And
I've got another minute here.
Okay, and then just real quick, Aaron talks about they have the Jeffers petroglyphs here in Minnesota that
That's
are
right.
7,000 years old.
That's right. Now, something interesting to keep in mind. I know Minnesota is a little bit up more, Midwest to us, but within the tri-state area, okay, there are over 800 sites that are exactly like Stonehenge. Over 800 unexplored sites. And Stonehenge, I mean, we've only excavated a couple few acres out of the 400 acres, whatever it is.
Yep.
So can you imagine what's waiting for us to be discovered?
There's a lot. There's a lot. All right, Michael. It is at Dark Hour Paranormal on YouTube to find your channel and all your videos and everything. And you're going to be back here with us on the 18th for the 100th episode, joining us with Dennis Stone. So that'll be good to have you back. But we're going to have to cut this short, everybody. He's got, his kids. It's the weekend and everything else. And we got to deal with family stuff. And this was and this was an impromptu kind of a show. We wanted to get something out and thought we could talk about the paranormal and get on here and get Michael on here. And he was gracious enough to give us an hour of his time. So, all right, Michael, remember, I'm recording your stuff locally. So give it a few minutes, depending on what it says, to upload before you log out. That way I got a separate audio track for you.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I thank you very much. Both you and Michelle for having me on the show. I was looking forward to this very much, knowing it was going to be an intense conversation. The only thing I was sad about was that I knew it would fly by like it did.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that just means we have to do it again. And Nain Rouge. Okay. Gotcha, buddy. Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. Well, all right. Thanks a lot, Michael. I'm going to send you to the back there and we're going to close things down. So
cheers. Thank you very much,
really
everyone.
Appreciate you, man. Take care.
Ciao.
All right, everybody. Yep. Sorry that we got to do the shorts, the shorts show, but we're trying to just get something out there because we haven't done anything because we were on vacation for a while too. So
it was literally flight, travel, flight back, very next morning, Wayne.
I'm flying out to Connecticut. Yeah.
So, and in like a 2-day time, got to see American Stonehenge.
Yeah, I was cool. Running around like crazy. Yeah, I mean we were out on the West Coast, right? So we were in Nevada. 3-hour time difference. Start to get used to that time difference. Then we fly back, and the very next morning, I'm flying to go to the West Coast.
It's like poof.
And I think I'm still hurting from it. So.
Well, I'm flying next week, so at least they're short flights.
Yeah. So, it's only like an hour.
South Carolina is a short flight.
Yep. All right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and take off. Remember, hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment. We love hearing from you guys. Send us an email at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. August 17th from 3 to 7 p.m. at New Boston Coney and Grill will be our meetup. And then on the 18th, join us live here for the 100th episode.
I do not want to eat chili cheese fries alone.
Right. Somebody's got to come and keep Michelle.
August 17th.
Yep. Keep Michelle company eating those chili fries because those things, I do not touch them. But all right, everybody. Thanks a lot. And remember, what is it, Michelle?
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Oh, yeah. And we are going to be on this Sunday, by the way.
Yep.
The
Sunday
4th.
night, we'll be back.
Yep.
8:00.
Yep. We're going to have, see if I can remember. What is his name? Oh, my God. I can't even remember our guest's name coming up. That's how tired and like messed up I am from all this travel. Anyways, just join us on Sunday at 8:00. And we'll have a good time. He's a reporter. He's wrote the book UFO Paradox. So very interesting stuff. And with Lou Elizondo's book being leaked and stuff, I want to talk to him about that. All right, everybody. Have a great night. Michelle?
Have a great night, everyone.
And remember, keep those eyes to that sky. Man, now where's the button to get out of here?